Welcome to Week 2's Faculty Guidance Lecture. This week we're going to talk about technological change and what's involved in the change process when implementing or converting to new technologies. As you know, change is inevitable. The only thing certain is that things are going to change. This is especially true for technology. As we have learned from our textbook and from the videos in Week 1, technological change happens at a rapid rate. However, just because technological change happens rapidly doesn't mean you can't plan for change or you shouldn't plan for the change. As a matter of fact, it's absolutely necessary to plan for technological change. So what are the components that need to be considered in our planning process? This is a slide that I created that I believe encompasses the major components you need to address in your planning process. On the outermost part of the planning circle are trends. I talked about trends last week. In addition to trends, there are products and markets, along with customers and competitors. These comprise the outer circle. These three components are the reason you plan for technological change. You plan in order to take advantage of trends by creating a product and a market for your product that will maximize your customer satisfaction while minimizing your competitors' impact. But as we see, planning is much more than being aware of trends, creating a product and market, and satisfying customers and overcoming competitors. Your planning process also has to consider the company's philosophical mission and goals, and the possible choices and direction your company can take. As you recall from our last lecture, these are also called the possible tomorrows. And finally, you need to consider your company's current operations and processes. As you see in this slide, dreams transition a company's philosophy, mission, and goals to the company's future state as defined by their possible choices and directions. Likewise, a company's procedures and policies transition a company's philosophy, mission, goals into its current operation and processes. And finally, a company's current operations and processes are transitioned to their future possible choices and direction by the gap analysis. Taking all of these into consideration, these elements can become robust and very effective planning tool for the change process. For a company to move forward, they first have to assess where they are and define where they want to go. The gap between where they are and where they want to be, their future state, is called the gap analysis. So the first thing a company needs to do in preparing for a technological change is an environmental scan. An environmental scan will determine the external and internal factors that need to be considered as the company moves forward with its change process. Once the environmental scan is complete, the company will know its current state. Then the company needs to assess how it's going to move from its current state to its future state. The analysis behind how a company moves from its current state to its future state is called the gap analysis. Traditional gap analysis takes into consideration trends, goals, resources, and constraints. Once a company is confident they understand the direction of their future state and the effort and resources required to move to that future state, they can begin the implementation process. However, once a company reaches its future state, as you see in this slide, there's a continuous assessment that must be done because they need to understand that change will continue to happen, and in order to take advantage of change and not be caught up by it, they need to assess where they are and what they need to do in order to stay current and relevant. Let's take a quick look at some of the components that make up the environmental scan. First and foremost, an environmental scan needs to answer two very important questions. The first question is, where are we? Knowing where a company is helps them understand its current state. Because, as we learned in last week's lecture, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you're starting. So the second question then that an environmental scan answers is, what do we know? It's very important to answer this question because, again, as we saw from last week's lecture, it's not what you know that will sink your plans, but what you don't know that can harm you. Therefore, it's important to quantify as many facts, opinions, and assumptions as possible in order to get the full picture of how the external and internal factors are going to influence your change process. There are a number of tools available that help a company conduct an environmental scan. Some companies use surveys, focus groups, and SWOT analysis. You may notice that my SWOT analysis has an extra T in it. When I conduct a SWOT analysis for an organization, in addition to identifying their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I also consider the second T, which stands for trends. I believe including trends in a SWOT analysis because it gives a much fuller picture than just assessing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This slide identifies some of the specific internal and external factors that a company needs to consider in their technological planning process. There are other factors that need to be considered, but I believe these are the most important. Overlooking or minimizing the impact of any of these factors will most certainly doom your change process. After a company completes their environmental scan, they have to conduct a gap analysis. The gap analysis really tells a company how they're going to move from their current state to their future state. Once again, in the gap analysis, a company has to consider both internal factors and external factors. Internal factors are those factors inside the organization, and external factors are those externalities that are going to influence the company from the outside. Let's first consider the internal factors. Internal factors need to be considered are the company's goals, the processes they have in place, and the resources available to them that they can use to bring about the change needed to move the company from the current state to the future state. As we saw in previous slides, and we heard in last week's lecture, the most important external factors are the company's customers, competitors, and trends. And if you remember from last week, we talked extensively about trends and how trends start with cultural trends that impact the business trends and how business trends eventually impact the technological trends. Once a company has conducted its environmental scan and has done a gap analysis to understand where it is and where it wants to go, the company is ready to implement its new technology. As you can see from this slide, there are several different implementation methodologies that a company can choose from. While not every step in every implementation methodology are identical, there are some commonalities. All implementation methodologies include a discovery phase, planning, or an assessment phase. These are usually followed by a construction, build, and design phase, which in turn are followed by some type of training or a rollout for the product to be put into production. After these phases, all good implementation methodologies then also consider an assessment, an improvement, or a review phase. Because again, you can't stay with the status quo. Things change. You have to be ready for those change processes. Now, I believe this slide is probably one of the most important slides you're going to see in this class, because I contend that careers are made and destroyed during a major change process. If you embrace change and become a leader or a great follower, your career is going to skyrocket. So during a change process, you need to distinguish yourself. You need to do something unique that differentiates yourself from the rest of the pack. The best way to do this is by stepping up to the plate and being someone the company can count on. Because again, in a change process, you're either a leader, a follower, or you're a resistor. And resistors don't stay with companies very long. One of the best ways to step up to the plate and do something constructive is to learn to be bilingual. And bilingual, I mean have the ability to speak both business and technology. Very few people are versed in both business and technology, and the gap between them is huge. And there's always a place for people that understand how to leverage technology into business processes. Also be aware that during a change process, not everything's perfect. Not every decision is going to be optimal, not every direction is going to be optimal. Things are going to happen that are going to try to disrail the process. Bad decisions will be made, some bad directions will be taken. But essentially deal with it. Ambiguity happens, as do bad decisions. So rather than getting frustrated, again, step up and be the person the company can count on. So during a change process, take control of your career. Don't be a victim. Become a change agent, but again, be passionate, but be rational about it. And always be a corporate citizen, because corporate citizens are the ones that flourish in the organization. So in conclusion then, as we've just seen, as they say, change is inevitable, except from a vending machine. See you next week.